The following was recorded in front of a live studio audience at the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe. This is the United Podcast Network.
Welcome to the Quirky Dog Podcast, inspired by some of the quirkiest dogs you can ever imagine and the owners who love them. This podcast is brought to you by the quirky couple themselves, Scott and Jess Williams. Their aim is to educate and entertain. Here's Scott and Jess.
Welcome, guys, and happy Wednesday. Today, we are going to talk about thinking twice before you give your dog that pill. But first, we're going to start with the Quirky Tip of the Day. Okay, ironically, our Quirky Tip is about incontinence medication. So go ahead and tell this story, because it's pretty amazing.
Well, I was at a client's house the other day. She has several rescue dogs. And one of the dogs there that I was not there to see that particular dog, but the dog's back end was all wet and kind of urine stained, you know. And I said, "Hey, what's up with your dog? She's all covered in pee." And she said, "Yeah, she just can't hold her pee." And I said, "Have you talked to the vet about that? Because they make an incontinence medication that I personally have used, and it was life-changing in
He had an incontinent mastiff, so that was a lot of incontinence.
I had a 150-pound dog that would go to sleep and wake up in a puddle, and it was gross. I had young kids there, and it made us keep the dog outside more often. And when I found out, talked to the vet about it, several months after it had started, he goes, "Oh yeah, well, you can give the dog some Proin, and it was because of a spaying that she became incontinent, and we gave the dog the medication, and it was fixed." So I got a text from my client a week later and said, "I talked to the vet, I got this, I gave the dog 2 of the pills, and she's dry, and I'm so excited. Thank you for letting me know."
Yeah, so if you're having incontinence issues, especially like when the dog's sleeping, they're not really sure what's going on. If the dog's greeting someone and peeing, that's normally submissive peeing, and I've seen this get a little confused sometimes with rescue dogs and stuff. The incontinence medication is not for that. But our dog Bam, who lived till she was 18, she was a rat terrier mix, she was on Proin and DES. So spay incontinence is very common, but there are ways that you can troubleshoot that. So in that case, give your dog the pill, and it might change your life.
Well, give it a shot. I mean, that may not be the answer, but it may be a really easy way to get straightened out.
Bring it up with your vet, because nobody wants a dirty dog. You can't bathe the dog every single day. There's a lot of fallout there. So incontinence is a huge issue, and not only affects the dog, but greatly affects the family as well. All right, so we are talking about this today because we had a client dog in last month that came to us, our policy for boot camp, which is very controversial, and a lot of people don't like to hear it. But
I don't think so.
If they're going to come in for boot camp with us, not if we're going to do classes with them, but if they're going to come in for boot camp, we want them weaned off of the behavioral medications beforehand. Basically, if they've been on something per the vet or per a veterinary behaviorist, we want that dog weaned off of these things before they come into our care, because we want to know the dog with, the original state it was in to go on these medications. We're dedicating our time to this dog. We're inviting this dog into our home. We kind of want to see what that looks like. So this dog came in on gabapentin for hip pain, which, Gab can be a behavioral med, and it can also be a med for pain. So I didn't really think twice about it. When we brought the dog back to our house, I read the sheet, and it was on trazodone too, which is like not how we do things. The people were going away. We already had the dog in our care. They had written on the form, feel free not to give it. Well, you have to wean trazodone. That's just how things work out. So I weaned it off. The dog was on a pill morning and night, and I weaned a half a pill to a half a pill morning and night, and now to a quarter pill morning and night, and then the dog was completely off of it. Go ahead.
A lot of vets prescribe trazodone for vet appointments and as needed for specific situations where the dog gets overly stressed. And when we asked them about this issue with the trazodone, they said, "Well, we only give it as needed." I'm like, okay, so when was the last time you didn't give it? Or how many times have you not given it in the past month? And they said like 2 or 3. So basically
the dog
it was a daily
pretty routinely, and I didn't want any withdrawal, side effects, and everything else. So anyway, why we're beginning with this story and why we're talking about this and where this is headed. The dog was an older dog. It was a little bit more of a senior than we would normally take. It was a 10-year-old Siberian Husky. And for us, that's getting into the upper ages. A lot of aggression issues. The people had some trips coming up. They didn't have a lot of options. So, we took this dog knowing that it seemed pretty healthy and had pretty good chutzpah to it. But the dog's eyes, when we picked it up, I hadn't seen the dog in person yet, were super glassy. And I said to Scott,
cloudy.
Yeah, cloudy, glassy. It looked like really severe cataracts. And I said to Scott, I'm like, did you notice the eyes on the eval? Like, I'm a little worried. Like, is the dog's vision going? Everything else. Lo and behold, we get down to a quarter of a pill, week 2. I literally bring the dog into the bedroom at like 9 p.m. at night. And I'm like, Scott, look at her eyes. Is it just me or am I going crazy? And her eyes were getting like clearer. So I don't know if it was because, and you said that you did some research that trazodone can have side effects with the eyes.
It does affect the eyes.
Yeah.
And it just depends on the dog.
Especially if there's like underlying, eye issues going on and some other optical stuff going on. So I'm going to preface this whole thing once again. I'm sure we pissed some people off by saying that we, suggest that owners or we require that owners wean their dogs off of behavioral meds before they come into our care. I'm also going to preface this by saying, if you have worked closely with a veterinary behaviorist or you have asked around or your dog is on pills and it's working out for you, that is all fine and good. This is not who this podcast is for. This podcast is for the person who's reaching for, some sort of answer and their vet just casually says like, oh yeah, here's a bottle of Xanax, try this and, see how it goes for the dog. So I just want to talk about the side effects of some of these medications. And I also would like to invite anyone listening or watching today, if you have some studies on how these medications have affected and changed behavior, I would love to see those. I have not dug into this in complete entirety, but I would love to see sample size. I would love to see before and after. I would love to see how we're measuring these types of things. And I understand that these drugs are on the market for after, a surgery, for instance. A lot of dogs go home on gabapentin and Remedil for pain. I understand that. Trazodone keeps dogs calmer during fireworks and storms and everything else. But a lot of these drugs are being dispensed, and they're being dispensed with the owners being told to give them every single day of the dog's life. So we just thought it was an important point to bring up, and we just kind of want to talk about that and flesh some of that out here today.
Another one, I don't know if you want to stay on the psychiatric medications, but you mentioned Remedil, and Remedil is like a miraculous drug. It is really, really, you can see, a dog that is having some joint pain or some type of, hip issue, and you put them on Remedil, or even an injury, you put them on this Remedil, and all of a sudden they're like feeling great. They're running all around. The downside to that, probably most dog people know this that have dealt with it. It's not good for long-term use.
Yeah.
So
it can be hard on their organs.
Yeah, it's hard on the kidneys. I think it's hard on the liver.
Yeah.
Processing that Remedil is kind of rough on the system, but it works really well. And I got to a point with my Mastiff where she was on it full time. And it was just weighing out the pros and cons based on her age and what damage that medication would do to her and quality of life issues. And we decided to put her on, the least amount we could get away with so that she was able to get up and go outside and just act like a dog, And she never suffered any side effects from that because she passed away before the kidneys or anything went bad. But so that's a kind of a toss up there. When you get into those kind of medications, it's the same with us. If you start eating Tylenol because you got shoulder pain and it works,
Oxy.
You're going to eat that stuff until it burns a hole in your stomach. Yeah. You're just going to do it,
Yeah, and no, I'm glad you brought that up because while Remedil is not a psychiatric drug, it is, an NSAID and a pain and inflammatory drug. If our dogs have some sort of surgery, so for us normally that would be like a routine spay. Jimmy just had the TPLOs. Everybody knows about that. We talk about that. If our dog, not that that's routine, but it was a recent surgery that our dogs had. If our dogs have something intense like that, I am, of course, going to medicate them for, 24 to 48 hours. But then I'm kind of going to see how they're doing. If they seem like they're okay, I do not give that medication for 7 to 10 days just because that was what the vet had advised. Now, I know my animals really well, but again, there's fallout from all of these types of things. So be conscious of this. And I guess before we head full on into the behavioral meds, I do want to touch on stuff like heartworm preventative and flea and tick preventative and everything else too, because Scott kind of wanted to loop that into this podcast. And I guess for us, the main thing about the behavioral medications and all of these like pharmaceuticals that are coming out for purely modifying behavior, we have not personally seen or heard of a lot of the positive side effects, okay? So we frequently have clients say, I have tried Prozac, I have tried Xanax, I have tried Trazodone, I have tried gabapentin, I have tried some sort of mixture of all of these. Nothing got better, and in fact, it got worse. For me, the flea and tick and the heartworm preventative does provide a lot of benefit. Now, us personally as dog owners, if we have a dog who's over 10 years old, we choose not to give heartworm preventative. You can call us cuckoo crazy. You can judge us all you want. That's fine. It's a cost-benefit analysis for us, similar to how Scott was talking about the Remedal with his Mastiff and pain and all of that in her organs. We do not do that for dogs over 10. We do not give any pesticide flea and tick preventative. Do our dogs get ticks? Yes. Do some of our dogs have anaplasmosis right now? Yes. Are they super symptomatic and it's a huge issue? No. But there's a toss up there. There's a trade-off. So I do want to say that while those drugs do have side effects, and some of these drugs you can put them on, you can put a collar or, you know, that ointment on, like the Advantix or the Frontline. Some dogs react with a seizure or something else. To me, there's more benefit because there's actually a direct way that those drugs impact the dogs. Preventing a dog from getting heartworm. Very expensive treatment, very grueling on the body, big process. Sometimes dogs can't make it through. Flea and ticks, Lyme disease, huge problem. Dogs have a Lyme flare-up. There's a big issue. Anaplasmosis can be a lot of fallout. So it's not that just these psychopharmaceutical drugs are the ones that are causing side effects, but to us, we're not seeing the benefit in the same way as we are things maybe like Remedal or like NexGard or like, you know, the Seresto collar or whatever else. And I bought a Seresto collar this year. It sat on my counter for, 6 weeks, and then I gave it away. I just can't do it. You can judge and call me cuckoo crazy all you want. I cannot bring myself to go there, especially as a lot of our dogs are getting older. So that's where we stand there.
Next season, we'll just roll the window down and give somebody $100 on the sidewalk.
Oh my God, don't even start. All right, let's go to break super quick. We've been super chatty here today, and then we're going to talk about some of the side effects of these behavioral medications.
Want to keep up with all the latest from the Quirky Dog podcast like me and Murphy here? Then make sure you head on over to the YouTube channel and subscribe. Or if you prefer to listen to the madness, go on over to iTunes or Spotify and follow the Quirky Dog podcast. And hey, while you're there, leave a rating and review and let them know what you think of the show. Until then, keep it quirky.
Okay, so some quick stats, and again, we are always very open to inviting a behaviorist on this podcast to discuss drugs in depth and talk about case studies and talk about how these things are helping. We are more than supportive if you are using these drugs and they're working for your dogs. So gabapentin, if used for, behavioral stuff rather than pain, first thing, this is an article from the AKC, so not super scientific, but it is something that has been out there on the internet. Stop. The most often reported side effects are sedation, loss of coordination. That makes sense. It kind of can dull you. Same thing can happen with people. Also, there can be vomiting and diarrhea. It's metabolized through the kidneys, and it's the same way with dogs. So dogs with kidney or liver problems can have more prolonged side effects. A really, really important thing is to get baseline blood work of how your dog's organs are functioning before you decide to put them on any of these medications, even if you have huge behavioral fallout. Honestly, when we had to put Jimmy on Remedal last year before we knew what was going on with him, and he had a little neck thing, I just had blood work ran. I want to see what their baseline levels are of their organs before I'm going to be putting something else in their body, especially on a regular basis.
And with him, he had anaplasmosis. So we got him vaccinated for Lyme as a puppy because we're in New England and there's a ton of ticks. And of course, it doesn't work against anaplasmosis. That's not Lyme disease. And he did get that. But then, and he was not even symptomatic. But since he tested positive, what was it, Doxy that we gave him? It was like a 30-day prescription. And we got not 2 weeks into that, and you did blood work. And
no, he was peeing his crate. He was drinking so much water. And his liver values were like next level cuckoo cuckoo.
So we
pulled back from the Doxy and everything else. But there can be fallout from medications, just to make this known. Other aside as it relates to gabapentin, human gabapentin and canine gabapentin can be quite different. And if you're giving the dogs the human gabapentin, it may be made with xylitol, which is an artificial sweetener that is very toxic to dogs and can be fatal. Obviously, it's safe for humans. I'm just saying it as an aside. If your vet says, try gabapentin, and you have gabapentin at home for yourself and it's the liquid form, be very conscious of that. Okay?
Does it taste like candy or something?
I don't know, sweetheart. I may be inquiring about some liquid gabapentin for Scott after this podcast with our primary care. All right, so we started with gabapentin. Gab and Traz are like the go-to, okay? So before a vet appointment, some people are throwing harder core drugs in there also, like ACE if the dog is really difficult at the vet. Gab and Traz are like your combo pack that you're seeing a lot. Another little baby aside with this, a few years ago, we had a dog in our care, no known medical issues. I think he had an avocado pit that was in his stomach, possibly. They told us that like the day that we picked him up. Super great timing for that information. He woke up in our care about 5 to 6 days in, maybe a little longer than that, a week in.
I can't remember which dog it is.
Watson, the dog that...
Oh, God, yeah.
So it might have been a little longer than that, maybe 7 to 10 days in our care. Everything was fine. Everything was normal. He woke up. He had... I definitely pooped himself, peed himself. He was not well. He was not well. Like the night before he was fine. The next morning he was not well. I was terrified. Like I was worried. We were looking at sepsis. I didn't know if the dog's life was going to be saved, everything else. So I called his local vet. We talked about this a few weeks ago on the How to Find a Vet podcast, that we always have vet information for the dogs we have in our care. And that veterinary office said, you need to give him Gab and Traz before we'll see the dog. And I said, look, I can put a muzzle on the dog. I can bring the dog in. Like, I'm worried about this dog, like making it through the day. I don't feel safe doing that to him. They wouldn't deal with it. I talked to the office manager, talked to a head vet at that vet, everything else. I brought him to my local vet with the owner knowing everything else. Dog had to be hospitalized in the hospital for a day with fluids, got him on some supportive stuff. His kidneys were borderline septic, but we turned it around and it was better. Praise the Lord, hallelujah, everything was fine. But had I given that dog Gab and Traz that day, I don't know how that would have affected his system. And I just, in my heart and in my head and knowing everything I know about dogs, I didn't want to do that. So yes, there's notes on charts sometimes that certain dogs are super dangerous and they need these meds. And if it works, great. If you have a super sick dog or you have a professional saying, I can bring the dog into you muzzled if you're concerned, we can make it happen. Be conscious of your dog's current state before you now put these medications into your dog as well. And as an aside, that dog did fine at my vet, our vet, no issues. No one really knew why there was a big flag.
He was feeling so poorly.
He was, but he was fine when he was bouncier and he left too. He really wasn't, we see some dogs with true aggression. So anyway, we're doing the Gab and Traz back to back because that is like your number one cocktail for veterinary medicine if you have a dog who's difficult at the vet. Okay, things that can happen with Traz, and this is now coming from the VCA website, so we're talking a little more scientific. This is, getting into the nitty-gritty of the science and the vetting. You can have vomiting, diarrhea, seizures, hypothermia, elevated body temperature, sensitivity to skin, depression, dilation of pupils, which is maybe what was going on with our boot camp dog that we were weaning off of Traz and saw the eyes get so much better. Depression, I already mentioned that one. Vocalization, blindness, that would be a really bad one. I'm glad that she didn't go blind. Excessive salivation, difficulty breathing, loss of control of your movements, paralysis, disorientation, coma, and death. So these are some pretty severe side effects for a drug where you're just kind of pulling your hair out with your dog and maybe you haven't explored training and you're just looking for, this might be a quick fix. That's some pretty severe side effects. And it can have longer side effects with dogs with liver and kidney issues, again, with how that's metabolized through the body and everything else. So these are the types of things. It's so funny. Scott and I watch some shows on Paramount now or whatever, and they still have commercials, so you still get the drug commercials that come on and they tell you how great the drugs are and how it's going to change your life. And then the last minute and a half of that commercial is there can be side effects where you may lose your sex drive and you may have all your hair fall out and you may, wake up and not be able to breathe the next day. All of a sudden, they list all these things and I'm thinking I'm okay with a little bit of blotchy skin after watching that. So just be conscious of if you're not reading the labels, if you're not doing your own research, if your vet is not talking to you about these side effects, just mention it to them. Say, are there any side effects before now you take this pill bottle home and you're giving this to your dog day in, day out, and you may have a way bigger problem than you did with a dog that just had some mild resource guarding before that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
No argument from me.
Okay, no argument from Scott.
And if you're personally going to be doing these hard drugs, intravenous drug use is much safer on the kidneys and the livers.
Okay, Xanax, another one. And these are all drugs that we have had clients personally using and they had zero side effect, and that is why they sought us out. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking in your head, dogs are getting Xanax, yes, they are. That is happening. People are being prescribed to give their dog Xanax for behavioral issues and hoping that helps. Side effects of that can include sedation, increased appetite, uncoordinated walking. So this is the type of situation where you don't want the dog to be getting this type of medication and then being loose around stairs, the first time that it's getting dosed. You're very conscious of what that looks like. Longer term use, physical dependence can be possible, and again, liver and kidney disease. Every single aside of this is dogs with liver and kidney disease. It can metabolize slower. It can make those things progress, everything else. Baseline blood work is so important. That information also comes from the VCA. Healthy, non-geriatric adult dogs may exhibit opposite side effects as well, including aggression, anxiety, excitement, or agitation. Well, if you're giving a dog Xanax that was aggressive and now it's increasing their aggression, that could be a big issue. So let's just be conscious of these things. Let's think about these things. Let's talk to some other people who use these drugs. Let's do a little research before we're just hook, line, and sinker. Let me buy my pill pockets and my dog's going to get a pill when my kids take their vitamins every morning. A little bit concerning.
All that being said, I think that the behavioral medications are pretty safe overall, and the reason I say that is because usually the vets prescribe the lowest possible dose to start, and they give the dog a few weeks, and then of course nothing's changing, so they raise the dose. They go a few more weeks, then they raise the dose again, and they have a lot of room there to experiment with the dog. But we just haven't, personally, and this is what I always say, the dog that it's working on, of course, we'd never see them because they're all happy and they're picking daisies and running around in fields with no problem. We see dogs that have been through several different roads trying to get their head straight, including medications, and it's not working for them. And they come to us at that point.
Well, and my bigger argument for these dogs who are picking daisies with their now opposable thumbs, I guess, is we didn't used to be doing this. Like when you first got into dogs, people weren't giving their dogs Prozac and Xanax and Trazodone and gabapentin. When I got into dogs 30 years ago, this is a recent phenomenon, I guess. So yes, maybe it's working, but I just don't understand why the dogs of old didn't need any of these things. And now pretty much 50 to 70% of society's dogs are prescribed them all the time, whether it just be episodic to get to the vet or because they're having huge behavioral fallout and everything else. So if it's working, great. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But just be very conscious of the choice you're making and what you're doing.
The reason is because it's available. I mean, this is the same thing with kids. When I was a little kid, there was only one kid in my school system that was on medication, and it was pretty obvious he needed it. Now, in any classroom, I'm sure that there's probably 15, 20% of the kids.
I don't have the stats on this, but I think dogs are getting medicated at a way higher rate than kids right now. And the other thing that I always say about this stuff and why it matters to me is a kid can come home and say, Mom, my stomach hurts. Mom, I'm not hungry. They can communicate, Mom, I have a headache. Mom, I can't sleep well. Parents and kids who that are of the age that they're able to speak, they can communicate these side effects a lot more so than maybe the dogs can. So available or not, someone is also making a large profit off of all of these drugs increasing more and more and more. This is not a big pharma podcast, but everybody out there knows that big pharma is a big force to be reckoned with. And if you choose to take these drugs on your own, great, we support you. If you choose to have your children take these drugs, great, we support you. But again, your kids can be giving you feedback of, and you can see changes in them. Oh, they're not eating their dinner as much. They're way more tired at school. The teacher's saying that they are having a lot more behavioral issues, acting out more. Maybe they're passing all their tests and able to focus more. Great, more power to you. Do the Adderall, do the Ritalin, do all the things that work if it's working. But make sure that you are very conscious of the baseline of where you began, whether it's your kids or your dogs or anything else. That's where I stand on that one. Well, okay, last one we're talking about is Prozac. This is probably the most commonly used drug out there. I also believe it's called fluoxetine. It could be called that. You may be giving your dog that. Most common side effects include sleepiness, decreased appetite, Other side effects could be vomiting, diarrhea, shaking, restlessness, panting, whining vocalization, incoordination, hypersalivation, weight loss. More severe side effects of Prozac can be seizures, aggression, excessive persistent vomiting, and then in cats, there's some other stuff as well. Again, they're mentioning dogs with liver and kidney issues, and if this moderate acting medication should stop working for a few days, then you need to just stop. If you're seeing any of these symptoms, obviously you stop it right then and there. So I would say Prozac is the most commonly prescribed one. And again, this is now information coming from the VCA website. So this is a veterinary establishment. They're telling you about these things, but I just want, if you're sitting in an office with a vet and your vet just says, oh, try this, ask them, are there side effects? Look, do some research on your own. Talk to some other people who have used it. Put out a public Facebook post. See how it's working. The best case scenario is you try this stuff and your dog's behavior doesn't get, or no, I guess the best case scenario is you try it, dog's behavior gets much better, your problem gets fixed, life is great, we move on, your pet insurance pays for it. Awesome. We are excited for you. We praise you. Next best case is you try it, nothing changes, and you choose to wean your dog off it with veterinary recommendation and, with veterinary supervision. Worst case scenario, your behavior problems could get worse, or your dog could have some pretty huge medical fallout. So that's a big red flag for us, and I just think we're handing these things out like Tic Tacs, and that isn't how it should be. I guess Beggin' strips, whatever you want to relate that to with dogs. I think we need to be a little more conscious of this before we're prescribing it and before people are choosing to give their dogs these things every day, every 12 hours, every 24 hours, XYZ.
Yeah, and I would also ask, what's the long-term plan here?
Yeah.
Instead of, we know what we're going to do right now, you want to give this medication, fine. What is the 6 month to a year out look like? I mean, is this something for the rest of the dog's life? They have to be on this medication, or is it a transitional tool where we're going to use this medication, try and address the problems that are causing the anxiety, and then maybe wean off of this medication, or what are we doing here? Because it's the same with people. I mean, my dad is on 15 medications, and he can barely keep track because every time he goes to the doctor, they say, okay, stop those 3. We're going to add this one.
Yeah, but
constant
to me,
musical chairs.
Blood pressure medication and heart medication and everything else, like Vetmedin in dogs is not the same as Xanax in dogs to me. Again, we're talking cost-benefit analysis. If it's keeping your dog from going into full-on heart failure, great, it's doing its purpose. I'm not saying never give your dogs a pharmaceutical, but if we're giving it for behavioral reasons and your behavior is not getting better, let's be very, very conscious of what that looks like and what that means. Anything else about this topic?
No, I mean, I only like medications that create hallucinations.
We know, and he's wearing his Grateful Dog shirt. Think twice before you give the dog a pill. I know that it's a hot topic out there and it seems like a quick, easy fix, but just please do your research. If nothing else, baseline blood work, if your dog's tummy gets upset and the fecal is clear, maybe that's going to be attributed to the medication. Just be conscious of what these things are because dogs cannot communicate to us, I feel a little woozy. I feel like I don't want to eat anymore. My eyesight is literally leaving me. Like I have a headache. Dogs cannot communicate these things to us. So if you cannot speak and you cannot talk about the side effects of your medications, be very careful about what you're prescribing your dogs and administering to your animals. Okay, you guys, thank you so much for joining us this week. We appreciate your time. We hope that you maybe gleaned something from this episode. If you liked it and you think that someone else in your inner circle or outer circle may benefit, please like and share. And in the meantime, keep it quirky. Take care, guys.
The views and opinions expressed by the hosts, guests, or callers of this program do not necessarily reflect the opinions of the Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, the United Podcast Network, its partners, or affiliates. The views and opinions